We're on time tonight. Thank you. Great. Good evening, everybody. I think it's fewer better, but fewer tonight. A nice, we've got a few latecomers, late stragglers coming in. So tonight we have it's been such an incredible dark day in London with the thunder and the lightning, and tonight is also the dark moon. This class is the last one before winter solstice, and it's the radical anthropology tradition to have a Grimm's fairy tale that's particularly relevant for this time of year. Either it's an Xmas fairy tale or a winter solstice fairy tale. We call it the shoes that were danced to pieces. And as you know, we think, as you've been in other of the classes where Chris did the fairy tales at Halloween with Sleeping Beauty, we think these fairy tales carry messages from before patriarchy. They're very ancient stories, and they're telling us, they're telling us about a time of power before it was assumed men were dominant to women and men had some sort of advantage over women. So they really do speak of women's power and take a position that assumes that. And so I'm going to hand over to Chris. Chris not being so well, so we're going to give him an easy night tonight. So you want to be in the line of the, you're all right with the camera. Yeah.
So,
and I'm going to just mute everybody so we don't have any interruptions.
yes, so my work on mythology began a long, long time ago. And in fact, here I wrote a PhD thesis on the extraordinary, monumental work of Claude Lévi-Strauss, 4 volumes called Mythologique, where Lévi-Strauss analysed about 1,000 myths from North and South.
And then
his conclusion.
could I have a hot chocolate as well?
We'll talk about hot chocolate, or are we talking about world mythology?
I can't
Are we
find
being muted now? Is everybody muted?
I think so.
Okay, it's a bit.
Fabulous, thank you.
Why?
Would be very nice.
Philip.
Perfectly incredible for Christmas. Okay, we've got a few more people just turned up. Why don't I start again? Right. Okay. Yes, as Camilla was saying, in the radical anthropology group, we have a ritual, and the ritual is that the last talk here before the winter solstice is always the shoes that were danced to pieces, one of the stories from the Brothers Grimm. And I think we must have been performing this ritual, talking about this tale, I don't know, 30 years or something. There was a time when there was a proposal to change. Isn't it getting a bit boring? Why do we always have the same story? And we decided to change it, and there was such uproar that we gave up. And here we are once again with the shoes that were danced to pieces. Now, my understanding of myths and fairy tales builds heavily on the work of Claude Lévi-Strauss. So if you're interested in mythology, I do strongly recommend, do not start with Sigmund Freud. I mean, he said some interesting things, or elongated objects are penises and round ones are vaginas, and it is interesting, but it's a little bit limited. And I would also say, really, do not start with Carl Jung. He has his archetypes, and they're kind of the great mother and whatever else archetype. But really, seriously, start with Claude Lévi-Strauss. And the thing about Lévi-Strauss is that he has such enormous respect for the intelligence, the collective intelligence expressed in magical myths and fairy tales. And he, as I was mentioning earlier, his monumental work, Mythologique, was an analysis of nearly 1,000 North and South American myths, magical tales, if you like. And he concluded with a chapter called One Myth Only. And he shows in that vast work that the different stories are variations on a theme. And he takes a myth, shows that it's varies on certain axes this way, and certain mathematical, operations you can work with a story. If you invert it, you turn it upside down. it results in another myth and another and another, but really underneath it all, they're all the same story. So his final chapter was called One Myth Only. I think very sadly, because he never made too clear what ultimate structure, that ultimate myth was, people got frustrated. And I think very sadly, most social anthropologists sort of gave up on the whole thing and decided that probably it's not true that all the world's myths are variations on a theme. I think that's a big tragedy. I think Levi-Strauss was definitely onto something. The problem was that he started from a kind of wrong initial assumption. He started from the idea that men invented culture by establishing the incest taboo, and he got everything sort of upside down. And when he found that when he looked at the different rituals which accompany the myths, he said that these rituals seem to be doing the wrong thing. They weren't separating male from female, human from animal, life from death in the way he thought they ought to. So he decided that ritualism, he actually used the word bastard. Ritual is a bastard. It keeps trying to mess up all the nice categories which the mythical mind is trying to establish. That, and I won't go into all that too much, except to say, underneath it all, Levi-Strauss was onto something very, very important. And it's true that in South America, particularly, anthropologists have been continuing his work and enormously enriching the findings he made in this amazing 4-volume work, mythological. I'm going to read out the story, The Shoes That Were Danced to Pieces. Can I ask you to listen quite carefully and even make a sort of record in your mind, maybe even a record on paper, because when I've read the story, I want to sort of collectively reconstruct the story from memory or from whatever notes you've taken. And we're going to show that Levi-Strauss is right in so many ways. So let me just say a few of them. First of all, in a magical myth or fairy tale, every last detail is there for a reason. These myths know what they're talking about. They don't hop and jump between different topics. Once you decode the story at a certain point, you should find, and this is what Levi-Strauss says, that the myths try to get across a rather difficult point, actually quite a simple one, but it's meeting resistance, our resistance. And in order to get the message across, he thinks of almost like the myth as a creature. The myth itself has its own intelligence. And it's if the myth is saying, right, I'm trying to get this message across, I'll say it this way, now I'll say it this way, and then another way, and another way. But ultimately, the myth is sort of saying the same thing. That doesn't mean all exactly the same thing in every myth, but there are obviously very different emphases in the different stories. But in this story, I want you to be able to sort of see for yourselves, if possible, that the story is consistent, logical, and it's kind of crystallized intelligence. It's not muddled thinking, it's not mixing things up. These stories know what they're talking about, and they need to be respected as science from an earlier period. I mean, science is collective knowledge. These myths are collective knowledge, but the knowledge, as Camilla was saying, about a period and about a way of life which we've lost sight of. And we've only got any way of knowing where these myths come from, the kind of world they came out of, really through the window provided by myths like this one. Of course, Levi-Strauss was dealing with North America and South America. And I thought, well, if Levi-Strauss is right, if these myths are all like one myth only, why stop at America? And Levi-Strauss himself made it clear that he didn't think he should stop with North or South America. He made it very clear if you went to Australia or Siberia or anywhere in the world really, you should find that his basic discoveries would apply. So for me, I was giving a talk this evening class a very long time ago. It was about 1978 or 9 or something, and I was giving a talk on fairy tales. And one of the members of the class was a bit more knowledgeable about fairy tales than I was, and we had a discussion and interchange. And ever since then, I've realized that the European fairy tales are just as amenable to the methods of Claude Levi-Strauss as the stories he looks at. Perhaps I just should say one thing. I want to give you a simple version of that ultimate myth. Well, I think if I don't, I know some of you have heard this before, you've been to these classes maybe before, but if you haven't heard it, perhaps this is the time to just say it. It's almost like the oldest trick or the oldest joke. Think of Punch and Judy. Kids, little kids, 5 years old, 6 years old. You've got Punch and Judy show, and you've got Judy with a baby, you've got Punch, and you've got the policeman. And you need a policeman because he's law and order. And you need Punch because he's always breaking the law. And you've got Punch being the most terrible, wretched dad. He gets the baby, he throws it against the wall. And, you know. And anyway, Judy gets the policeman in and he comes with an instruction. And he lifts his instruction and he whacks Punch on the head. And Punch falls down and he's dead. Oh, he pops up again alive. And of course, for the kids, there's nothing more funny than Punch being dead and then popping up alive. And he gets the instruction and then he bangs the policeman on the head and he's dead. And then the policeman jumps up alive and he bangs him. That movement between two rivals, death, life, is too different from the key myths of Claude Lévi-Strauss's mythology. So the number one myth, the myth that it all starts with in volume 1 of Claude Lévi-Strauss's work, is about, it's called a bird nester. It's about two men, a father and son, and they're rivals, enemies of each other, over the same woman. And one kills the other, and then he comes alive again and kills his rival. And it's like between earth and sky, up and down, you know, it's a very similar idea of death followed by resurrection as a kind of joke. Right. Where does the idea of dying and then coming alive again come from? Most people who are asked that, who are familiar with mythology, will say, well, of course, it's the moon. After all, what does a moon do? It slowly dies, and then you've got no moon, and then, oh, everyone celebrates, the moon starts to come alive again. Yeah, not bad, but it's so much deeper than that, because I don't at all think that people kind of noticed the moon waxing and waning and thought they'd, you know, build sort of fairy tales around the fact that the moon waxes and wanes. I mean, that's a bit weak, isn't it? My own view is that life itself had a pulse. We all know that life has a pulse in our society. We have day and we have night. We have summer and we have winter. We used to have waxing moon and waning moon, full moon and dark moon. And obviously today, because of light pollution and all sorts of various things, patriarchy, we're not so aware of the moon as probably we were when Homo sapiens evolved. But there was a time when, in order to plan any event, you need to triangulate. You need to just, if you're planning in the future, you need to say the first full moon after, say, the autumn equinox. You have to triangulate with the sun and the moon to get a date in advance in order to plan anything, to probably anything. And then we have the fact that all over the world, and whenever I talk about this, I have to be a little bit careful. All over the world, the word for female periodicity, which we call menstruation, all over the world, is the same word as the word for moon change. Okay, it's just language, it's just verbal, you know, tradition. In our culture, the word menstruation means moon change. All over the world, the word for menstruation has, you know, something to do with, you know, on your period, you visit the moon, your husband is the moon, you're with the moon, you're consorting with the moon's coming down to have sex with you. As many tricks or jokes describe it in that way. Why are you bleeding? It's because I'm having sex with the moon. It's quite a common idea. And of course, we think, okay, that's kind of quaint, it's a tradition, people seem to link menstruation with the moon. It's a little bit more than that, of course, because the length of the human female menstrual cycle, on average, works out as, guess what, 29.5 days. which of course could be a coincidence.
That's average.
That's the average.
mean For
That's the
women in their
For women,
30s,
And the
yeah.
max and the period of maximum fertility. So
Mhm.
when you're young in your teens, it'll be a little bit longer than that. As women go older, I'm not telling you anything interesting. Everyone knows this, but the point is that we humans are special because chimpanzees have a menstrual cycle, but it's got nothing to do with the moon. It's 36 days on average. The other great ape that were very closely related to the bonobos, the length of cycle is 40 days. So the different primates have lengths of cycle longer than the length of the moon, shorter than, but we have, on average, have to be quite careful here, but we now have lots and lots of statistics because we have these menstrual apps and it's no doubt about it at all. We have precisely the length of cycle you would predict if in the evolutionary past, some adaptive advantage was gained by women synchronizing with each other using the moon as a clock, 29.5 days. That's the length of time it takes for the moon to pass through its phases as seen from the Earth. So if the idea was that the moon dies once a month and comes alive again, and women traditionally are linked to the moon, you can see why women would undergo temporary death. It's like when you bleed, you're dying, but it's okay, it's a little death, it's a temporary death. You'll come back to life after having died. So it's not the kind of, you're dead, but that's it, you're dead. You're going to come back to life. The world's magical myths and fairy tales are about this. I'll just describe it in simplest possible terms. First of all, we're all alive. We're in this world, the world of the living. And in this world, usually there's light. You can see what you're doing. The sun's often shining and the moon's bright. People are doing normal activities. People are cooking, having sex, looking after the kids, wandering around, all sorts of normal things are happening. And then in the story, you start out in this world, and then triggered by a flow of blood, or something evidently symbolic of a flow of blood, you move from this world into the world of the dead. So first you're alive, and then you've moved into the land of the dead. You're dead. And there's nothing at all magical about that. It's just you were alive, and now you're dead. And now comes the magical bit. You come back from the dead. That's the magical bit. And Levi-Strauss makes it clear that is the one myth only that all these myths can be related to. I mean, he says in a rather more complex way, he ends up with things like to be and not to be and all kinds of philosophical stuff. But in essence, that's it. And then a little bit more than that, because there has to be something consistent about the features of the other world, the land of the dead, so that you know where you are. And something consistent about the features of this world, again, so that when you hear those features being discussed, you know, okay, we're in the world of the living. So the things going on in the world of the dead have to be consistently different from the kinds of things that go on in the world of the living. Well, in the world of the living, I mean, we're sort of upright, we eat, I don't know, we cook food, all sorts of ordinary things happen in the daylight. And then during the period when we're dead, there's certainly not going to be any cooking fire. There's going to be wet. If there is any intimacy, it's certainly not going to be marital relationships. It's not going to be husband-wife sex. There won't be nice, sweet music in the land of the dead. If there is any sound, which it usually is actually, it'll be kind of noisy cacophony, maybe like thunder, loud sounds, loud noises. And all those things, loud noises, wetness, intimacy between blood kin, darkness, seclusion, all those things go together. And if a storyteller was to mix up so that while you're in the land of the dead, someone's cooking meat and having a feast, that just wouldn't work. The dead don't do that. The dead eat raw meat, if they eat anything at all. There's going to be lots of blood around in the other world. So those features are consistent across all the world's myths. And in this story, you're going to be able to. Hello, have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the point about feasting.
Feasting.
Yeah, aren't there lots of myths about how it's feasting and cook food is a big part of it?
Yes. It'll be the time when you're feasting on cooked meat will be linked to the time when you're dead, but it won't be sort of muddled up with it. You'll see that there's a movement between two states. So let me just read out the story. I mean, obviously it's great that you know a bit about other myths. So I'm going to read this out, and as I said before, I want you to see whether we can actually, it's quite short luckily, whether we can reconstruct the story, and as we reconstruct it, kind of decode it. So, right, the shoes that were danced to pieces. There was once upon a time a king who had 12 daughters, each one more beautiful than the other. They all slept together in one chamber, in which their beds stood side by side. And every night when they were in them, the king locked the door and bolted it. But in the morning, when he unlocked the door, he saw that their shoes were worn out with dancing, and no one could find out how that had come to pass. Then the king caused it to be proclaimed that whosoever could discover where they danced at night should choose one of them for his wife and be king after his death. But that whosoever came forward and had not discovered it within 3 days and nights should have forfeited his life. It was not long before a king's son presented himself and offered to undertake the enterprise. He was well received, and in the evening was led into a room adjoining the princess's sleeping chamber. His bed was placed there, and he was to observe where they went and danced, and in order that they might do nothing secretly or go away to some other place, the door of their room was left open. But the eyelids of the prince grew heavy as lead, and he fell asleep. And when he awoke in the morning, all 12 had been to the dance, for their shoes were standing there with holes in the soles. On the second and third nights, it fell out just the same, and then his head was struck off without mercy. Many others came after this and undertook the enterprise, but all forfeited their lives. Now, it came to pass that a poor soldier who had a wound and could serve no longer found himself on the road to the town where the king lived. There he met an old woman who asked him where he was going. I hardly know myself, answered he, and added in jest, I have half a mind to discover where the princesses dance their shoes into holes, and thus become king. That is not so difficult, said the old woman. You must not drink the wine which will be brought to you at night, and must pretend to be sound asleep. With that, she gave him a little cloak and said, if you put on that, you will be invisible, and then you can steal after the 12. When the soldier had received this good advice, he went into the thing in earnest, took heart, went to the king, and announced himself as a suitor. He was as well received as the others, and royal garments were put upon him. He was conducted that evening at bedtime into the antechamber, and as he was about to go to bed, the eldest came and brought him a cup of wine. But he had tied a sponge under his chin and let the wine run down into it without drinking a drop. Then he lay down, and when he had lain a while, he began to snore as if in the deepest sleep. The 12 princesses heard that and laughed, and the elder said he too might as well have saved his life. With that, they got up, opened wardrobes, presses, cupboards, and brought out pretty dresses, dressed themselves before the mirrors, sprang about, and rejoiced at the prospect of the dance. Only the youngest said, I know not how it is. You are very happy, but I feel very strange. Some misfortune is certainly about to befall us. Thou art a goose, who art always frightened, said the eldest. Hast thou forgotten how many king's sons have already come here in vain? I had hardly any need to give the soldier a sleeping draught. In any case, the clown would not have awakened. When they were all ready, they looked carefully at the soldier, but he had closed his eyes and did not move or stir, so they felt themselves quite secure. The eldest then went to her bed and tapped it. It immediately sank into the earth, and one after the other they descended through the opening, the eldest going first. The soldier, who had watched everything, tarried no longer, put on his little cloak, and went down last with the Halfway down the steps, he just trod a little on her dress. She was terrified of that and cried out, "What's that? Who's putting my dress?" "Don't be so silly," said the eldest. "You've caught it on a nail." Then they went all the way down, and when they were at the bottom, they were standing in a wonderfully pretty avenue of trees, all the leaves of which were silver and shone and glistened. The soldier thought, "I must carry a token away with me," and broke off a twig from one of them, on which the tree cracked with a loud report. The youngest cried out again, "Something is wrong. Did he hear the crack?" But the elder said, "It is a gun fired for joy, because we have got rid of our prince so quickly." After that, they came into an avenue where all the leaves were of gold, and lastly into a third where they were bright diamonds. He broke off a twig from each, which made such a crack each time that the youngest started back in terror, but the elder still maintained that they were gun salutes. They went on and came to a great lake whereon stood 12 little boats, and in every boat sat a handsome prince, all of whom were waiting for the 12, and each took one of them with him, but the soldier seated himself by the youngest. Then her prince said, "I can't tell why the boat is so much heavier today. I shall have to row with all my strength if I'm to get across it." "What should cause that?" said the youngest, "but the warm weather. I feel very warm too." On the opposite side of the lake stood a splendid, brightly lit castle, from whence resounded the joyous music of trumpets and kettle drums. They rode over there, entered, and each prince danced with the girl he loved, but the soldier danced with them unseen, and when one of them had a cup of wine in her hand, he drank it up, so that the cup was empty when she carried it to her mouth. The youngest was alarmed at this, but the eldest always made her be silent. They danced there till 3 o'clock in the morning, when all the shoes were danced into holes, and they were forced to leave off. The princes rowed them back again over the lake, and this time the soldier seated himself by the eldest. On the shore they took leave of their princes and promised to return the following night. When they reached the stairs, the soldier ran on in front and lay down in his bed, and when the 12 had come up slowly and wearily, he was already snoring so loudly that they could all hear him, and they said, "So far as he's concerned, they're safe." He took off their beautiful dresses, laid them away, put the worn-out shoes under the bed, and lay down. Next morning, the soldier was resolved not to speak, but to watch the wonderful goings-on, and again went with them. Then everything was done just as it had been done the first time, and each time they danced until their shoes were worn to pieces. But the third time he took the cup away with him as a token. When the hour had arrived for him to give his answer, he took the 3 twigs and the cup and went to the king, but the 12 stood behind the door and listened for what he was going to say. When the king put the question, "Where have my 12 daughters danced their shoes to pieces in the night?" he answered, "In an underground castle with 12 princes," and related how it had come to pass, and he brought out the tokens. The king then summoned his daughters and asked them if the soldier had told the truth, and when they saw that they were betrayed and that falsehood would be of no avail, they were obliged to confess all. Thereupon the king asked which of them he would have to wife. He answered, "Oh, I'm no longer young, so give me the eldest." Then the wedding was celebrated on the self-same day, and the kingdom was promised him after the king's death. But the princes were bewitched for as many days as they had danced nights with the 12. So, I mean, what do you think? Is it possible to reconstruct the story here? I mean, it's easy in a little workshop, but because we're on Zoom, we can't have little tables and do workshops. But I'm going to see if we can get this. How did it all start? Once upon a time.
Sleeping together.
Right. Okay. 12 daughters. Sorry, yeah. They all sleep together in one chamber. Okay. Yes. So if you were to say, sorry, they got the bed side by side. Yes. So I suppose you could ask a question. If you're a bunch of girls, what's the best way to get into the other world? Make sure you're all sleeping together. And what's the sort of mechanical technique to getting into the other world? Do you remember? You just tap on the bed, it's magic. It sort of sinks into the ground, and there you are, off you go, down into the other world. Okay, so why is the king in the first place? I mean, if it's all a secret? How does the king know that something's odd about it? Because I mean, the king locks the door, doesn't give the bedroom. So what's he? Yes, okay.
Shoes with holes,
So okay,
holes in the
yes,
soles.
give me the exact words. Yes, what did the king find? All their shoes have got holes in the soles. Right. Well, I mean, maybe Freud could possibly come in at this particular point in time, I suppose. I mean, certainly shoes feature a lot in fairy tales. But Cinderella, of course, is all about shoes, and slippers and stuff. And these holes, sorry, I got it the wrong way around. These shoes have got soles with holes in them. So we just leave it there, having thought about it just a little bit. Okay, right. The king is determined to find out where on earth they go. And so he, tell me the rest of it, what did he do? He makes an announcement.
I think we find we get to be king when I die, or if they can't do it within 3 days, then they just.
Yes.
That's
Yes. Can you see there's an interesting thing about the kingship, isn't it? Because the person has to come from somewhere else and find out how the girls dance all night. And then he would be king in that country. So he'll be king in the country where he will become king when the existing king dies in the country where these girls are.
How would
Okay.
we describe that in anthropological
Yes,
terms?
it seems as
terms
if
of residence?
it seems as if in anthropological parlance, and this is really strange, and I think it's true to say that in just about every single European fairy tale, the king, the young hero who wins the prize of marrying a daughter, a king's daughter, he himself becomes king, and he marries, we would say, matrilocally. So it's matrilocal residence. Can you see what I mean? Not that the hero wins a reward and he's able to take the girl as his bride and seize her and then carry her back to his own country. He's going to become king where his bride that he marries resides already. So that is called matrilocal residence. And we think in RAG, without any shadow of doubt, that matrilocal residence would have been the normal situation. It certainly is a lot of freedom of choice as to where hunter-gatherers live. So when we were once all hunter-gatherers, people have had a lot of freedom exactly where to set up when they get together, man and a woman. But the choice for the woman would always be pretty much always, certainly for the first child, to live with mum. She would want to live with her mum and bring her fella in to live with her there. And it's just so interesting that in these stories, which seem to go back a long way, we find that similar pattern of what's called post-marital residence, matrilocal residence. Okay. So now, okay, so a number of royal persons, king's sons, hear about the proclamation. They want to be king, and the old king dies, and so they volunteer. So now what happens? The king tells them what to do, and what are they got to do?
They all fail.
Well, they all fail, that's for sure.
Why do they fail? What happened?
That's right. So what happens is that the eldest of the sisters gives the soldier, not soldier, the king's son who wants to be the king, gives him a drink of wine. We're not told the color of the wine. Do you think it would be white wine? I think anyone who did a pantomime version of this, and it was white wine, would be great. Yeah, of course it's red. It's bull's blood. It's proper wine, proper red wine. So they're given the wine to drink. And so do you remember when I was saying what happens? You have this world and the other world, and what shifts you into the other world is a flow of blood, or something which is clearly symbolic of blood. There's actually quite a lot of blood in this story, and you never find, like even with the Sleeping Beauty, very clear stories which are clearly about menstruation. It's always, a little bit secret. Not really directly menstrual blood. It's going to be in Sleeping Beauty, of course. She pricks her finger and bleeds. So here, there's quite a lot of blood, And it seems to coincide with or trigger this extraordinary adventure when all the girls together go into the other world. But there's a little bit more blood to come, isn't there? It's not just the wine, the red wine, because, of course, the king's son, he stays 3 nights with the door open, supposedly watching what the girls get up to. And after 3 nights, what happens? You still haven't found. Yeah, I think his head is chopped off without mercy. So there you are. That's what happens. I think beheading is very neat, isn't it? I mean, it's a quick, nice, easy way of producing lots of blood and making sure it's really dead. I mean, it's certainly true that a lot of Claude Lévi-Strauss's myths, there's a severed head, and it's sometimes rolls around. Sometimes it, by the way, it turns into the moon. By the way, the head.
John, you wanted to say something.
Having some interruption from the Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom.
Okay,
John,
no.
do you want to say something? I'll have to amplify it because we haven't got you on the speaker at the moment. Go on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but I'll have to talk to the room.
I'm going to put up with this once.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about the business of the 3 nights, which is, as far as I know, the moon always disappears for 3 nights.
Okay, so 3 nights, the moon disappears for 3 nights.
Okay, well that's
Can disappear for 4.
Maybe 4.
Can disappear for 4, but always for 3.
That's
Yeah.
right. Okay.
So it's a sort of irreducible period for the disappearance of the moon.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so it becomes a bit like an accompanying the moon into the underworld story, no?
Yep.
Okay, that's good.
That sounds
So
good.
right. Okay. I mean, it won't work very well if we have too much interchange between the Zoom and this, will it? I don't know what you think, Camilla. Is it
Well,
fine? I mean,
Why
it's a really
haven't the Zoom people got as much right?
okay.
as
All right, Zoom people
everybody
have as much right to it. Fine.
Zoom uprising.
Okay, all right. Zoom uprising. Thank you so much. Anyway, so now we know why it is that
Can
there's
turn
three.
on the power and get the speaker, but anyway,
You want to do it?
I'll keep Zoom under
Right,
control.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, you stand up to the Zoom people. So we've been reminded that in all these fairy tales, the period of death, and of course it's true with Christianity, that Jesus dies for 3 days and then comes alive again. So that's extremely recurrent motif. It's because the sun disappears, and what John's supposed to be saying, it could really be 4 nights without seeing
The moon disappears.
Sorry, the moon disappears for 4 nights before being seen, but it's going to be at least 3. And I suppose 3 is the sort of normative. You don't want to be wandering around between 3 and 4. It's a bit messy. So let's just stick to 3, like the fairy tales do. Okay, so where were we now?
The head being chopped off.
The head chopped off. Yes.
Maybe even that represents something to do with the moon.
Yes.
Where else is there blood in the story? Soldier with a wound.
Right. Okay. So we're moving on a bit. We've had 3 enthusiastic young men, princes, and each one has his head chopped off, and presumably there's plenty of blood in that, as that happens. And now we have a soldier, and we're told something very important about him. He has a wound.
That's why he can't be a soldier anymore.
So he's a wounded soldier. Yes, he was a soldier. He had a wound. Let's just think about that. He has a wound. I mean,
The wounded man, isn't that always the trickster?
sorry?
The wounded man, isn't that per definition the trickster in that?
I think so. I think it's almost the definition of a trickster is a man with a wound. I mean, of course, the wise wound is menstruation. It's often metaphorically a wound, a woman's wound, of course. Animals hunted and speared, and they have a wound, and it's often linked to the other wound. But this man is like, he's died already. He's had a wound, but maybe it's a little death. He's died and come alive again. is, and that's what a wound is. It's like it
Mm.
kind of died, but not quite, and come alive again. So he's kind of immune to some of the dangers that the other young men succumb to. And okay, so how did it?
And how else does he gain?
Yes,
I mean, he has other
he's
connections.
got a wound, which is a huge advantage in magic. But he's got a huge extra advantage, hasn't he? Because the old witch has befriended him and told him when they meet, he says, "Oh, well, I've a good mind to, become king, sort out where the sisters go," and she gives him a bit of advice. And his advice is, remind me, don't drink that wine. Okay.
Red.
And also another bit, he's given a gift, isn't he?
Invisible.
So he doesn't drink the wine, and by wearing the cloak, he's going to be invisible. Like Harry Potter. Yes. I
Or
mean,
like the moon.
yes,
indeed.
I mean, of course, lots of things are like Harry Potter. But
But
perhaps we
that's
should put it
because
the other
Harry
way.
Potter's copied the
I-
fairy tales,
I
not the
would
fairy
imagine
tales.
Harry Potter's copied the fairy tale more than the fairy tale. Harry Potter. I know you know that. I know you think that. Yeah. So, but of course, as Camilla said, the point about the moon each month is that it's invisible. It comes down to Earth, and it can't be seen. So, and of course, right across the world, the idea is that when women do bleed, if they're cycling, it's precisely because the moon has come down to Earth and cause that blood to flow. So it's the moon's blood that flows in you when you. Anyway, he's obviously a man, but he's kind of an odd one because he's had these secrets given to him, courtesy of a woman. So without the old witch, it's doubtful whether he would have got away with his trick of spying on the girls and revealing their secret to the authorities, to the king. So what happens? He remind me again. He's got there. He's sitting by the girls. How does he avoid drinking the wine? Yeah, he has a sponge on him. It all soaks up so that it doesn't spill all over the floor, so they can't see that he hasn't drunk it. And so the girls get very excited. They're quite sure that the silly old man is going to have his head chopped off like the others. They're delighted about this prospect. They prance about. They open all their wardrobes. They get out the finest dresses. They scamper around. Very, very excited. And they all get into bed together. And then they tap the bed, and down it goes. And down goes the wounded soldier. And of course, he treads on the skirt.
There might be something about the youngest being worried and the eldest kind of left a shot,
Yeah,
right?
yes, there's no doubt about that. Yes.
It's a
So,
persistent
I mean, that's an interesting thing about
thing.
the European tales. We need to remember that these tales were told during initiation. These tales weren't just abstract stories told at bedtime. These are stories about death and rebirth, accompanying an experience of death and rebirth that young people would go through as they came of age. So a girl, when she had her first menstruation, would go through a ritual during which she would kind of die to the world and then come alive again. And boys, when they made their first kill as hunters, they would also have an initiation ritual. And these rituals would be sort of explained by the stories. And what you find, and I think you spotted this already, is that there's a tendency, certainly in the European fairy tales. I don't think it's quite the same in North and South America, but it's the youngest sister or the youngest brother who is the hero. It's the clever one. It's like the storytellers are trying to say, isn't she clever? Isn't he clever? They pick the youngest, and instead of saying the youngest hasn't learned anything yet, they're still green, they take the youngest as the hero, who's most alert to what's going on. So it's the youngest who's constantly aware something's wrong. So the youngest is just going down the stairs when the soldier treads on her skirt, and she thinks, "Oh, I'm worried, something's wrong here." And of course, the elder, she's the eldest one, but she's not really so clever because she says, "Oh, he's just caught you just on a nail." but she should have been a little bit more alert to, you know, she should have been a bit more suspicious of what's really going on. Anyway, down they go. And perhaps we should just kind of hurry up a little bit. So three times. Sorry? Ah, right.
Just one thing, is I think it's the, I don't know if it's the youngest one, who said, oh, this, they're going to discount, but she has, it's not discount, she said something similar, you have to get, you can do it.
What, when she's in the boat, when they're hot?
It's still,
She feels anxious.
Yes, the youngest feels
She
anxious.
feels anxious.
And then her anxieties are confirmed when she feels her
The skirt,
caught on
the
the
nail. And then when the old soldier gets into the boat, the prince says, this is so heavy, and that's her boat.
Yes,
That's
but
the
before we get
one
to there,
Yeah.
of course, the old soldier has got to have
Oh,
proof.
the gun,
Gonna
the
prove to
gun
the authorities,
suits,
prove
yes,
to,
yes.
if you like, the patriarchy, to the king,
Mhm.
everything which he claims has been happening. So he has to have some evidence. So his evidence is, okay, he plucks a branch from one of the trees,
Mm.
and the trees have got gold branches and silver branches,
Diamonds.
right? And then diamond branches. There's three types of branch, and he cracks, he pulls a branch which is made of silver, and now what happens? Big loud noise. And remember, I was saying one of the findings of Claude Lévi-Strauss's mythologique is the function of noise, and loud noises go with movement into the other world. And he comes up with one of the strangest of conclusions in mythology, which is that noise is antithetical, is the way he puts it, to cooking. So when you're cooking a large game animal, you put it in an earth oven, it takes a long time to cook, everyone's going shh, 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 shh. And that's because any loud noise is a sort of like this, it's the sound of blood. It's going to be, loud noises bring up blood. And when you're cooking, you want the blood to disappear. That's the whole point of cooking, is to remove the visible blood from the meat. So if you make a loud noise, more blood's going to bubble up, and your cooking is going to go into reverse. And if you're not careful, the dead animal, instead of getting cooked, it's going to get more and more raw until it jumps up alive and scampers off. So you've got to be really careful with noise. But noise goes with movement into the other world, along with blood. And what you'll find with all the different details and all the stories, in so many ways, the noise kind of is the sound of the blood. The blood goes with noise. It's not music. It's not soft, gentle noise. It's not the kind of noises that a couple would want during the honeymoon. It's a cacophonous, disturbing noise. It breaks up relationships between the sexes, and it takes you into the world of the dead. Anyway, it's a loud bang, a loud report, and of course, the youngest sister is disturbed by it and says, "What was that?" And the oldest sister says, "It's a gun salute. Don't worry. Our princes are firing off their cannon out of joy because we've succeeded so early in getting rid of our prince."
Old soldier.
Sorry,
The old soldier.
the old, and in this
It's
case,
old.
well,
There's
finally
old
it would be the old soldier. Yes, yes, that's right. On this last occasion. Yeah. So anyway, now they reach. He takes a silver branch, a gold branch, and he takes a cup, doesn't he, from the other side of the river, from the feast they've been having, the golden cup. So okay, anyway, they reach a river, and on the other side of the river is this castle, and they can hear the kettle drums, all the dancing, all the music from this palace they're going to go to, and it's a river. It's a river that is really difficult to cross. You need a boat, but they cross the river, and they dance and dance and dance and dance on the other side of it. And it's only when their shoes have been danced to pieces and there are holes in the soles that they have to stop. And then they come back across the river. And so we're dealing now with the last episode. And as the girls are putting the cups of wine to their lips, the soldier steals the wine and drinks it himself. The young sisters, puzzled by this, The older sister says, don't worry about it. But there's something interesting, isn't there, about drinking wine? Is it a good idea if you're trying to find out where those girls have gone to and you want to eventually be king? You can't really make a generalization, can you, about whether it is good or it's not good to drink red wine? What's the actual situation here? Spelled out quite clearly in the story. It's not good to drink wine in this world, but when you're in the other world, it's very good to drink the wine. So the soldier's doing all the right things to avoid being seen and detected by drinking the wine himself. Obviously having to be a bit careful not to be too obvious what he's up to. And then they get in their boats and try to row back. And of course, it's it's a difficult river to cross. It's sticky, it's warm. Eloise, you've done a whole lot of work on rivers in the Loire, and rivers becoming sort of persons and rivers becoming creatures. And of course, we know in so many of the world's myths about rivers that the rivers are rivers of fertility and rivers of blood, indeed. And of course, in Greek mythology, there's the river Styx, isn't there, which is pretty central. So this is one of those rivers. But anyway, they finally get across. And although
he comes back with the different princess, doesn't he? He goes with the young one, and he comes back with the older one, who's going to be the one he marries.
He goes 3 times.
Yeah.
No, does he come? He comes back just twice with the youngest and then the oldest. Is that what happens?
On it, well, as they describe the first journey, he goes across with the young one so they feel the boat is very heavy, but he can't. But it says he comes back with the old one, doesn't it? Am I right? Yeah.
They went and came to a great lake whereon stood 12 little boats, and in every boat sat a handsome prince, all of whom were waiting for the 12th.
Going down.
Okay.
They danced till 3, they're forced to. This time the soldier seated himself by the eldest.
I see.
So it's the youngest going, it's
They
the
danced
eldest
there till
coming
3
back.
o'clock in the morning, when all the ships were danced into holes and they were forced to leave off. The princes rowed them back again over the lake. I see, yes, the princes rowed them back. It's only the eldest that the soldier seats himself next to the eldest. He doesn't do the rowing, does he? But
No, but he's invisible in the boat, and in
Yes,
the when he's going, he's with the prince with the young one, and when he's coming back, he's with the prince, the old one.
Okay. So the soldier has got his evidence, and he reports to the king that he knows how it is that the sisters disappear, and what they're up to when they do. Perhaps an interesting question here. So many stories end with the beautiful maiden who's rescued by the prince. He kisses her, she wakes up, they get married, and they all live happily ever after. Why is this story so different? What is it about marriage in this story? Sorry?
There's a curse that ensues from the marriage, because they get married, but then the other sisters are cursed for as many days as they have done.
Yes, but what do the sisters think? What do the sisters think about marriage, and how is marriage sort of meted out? What's the function of marriage in this story? I mean, it's fairly obvious that marriage is a punishment, isn't it? It's the punishment for being found out. The one thing those girls do not want is to get married. I mean, they're desperate not to be caught, not to be married.
They want to have fun.
And they want to have fun.
Girls
It's
like
like marriage is not going to be such fun. It looks as if, oh my God, we're going to have to be married. We've been having such fun. So
they have absolutely no compunction in these princes being killed. They just want chop their heads off, chop their heads off.
Not only do they not want royal princes, they're quite happy to see their heads chopped off.
If we think about Sleeping Beauty and the prince is all hanging on the thorn hedge,
that's very
but there isn't much. It's a very similar thing to the
so
princes, but
it was-
there isn't the same agency as the agency of these girls.
That's right. In the
No.
story of the Sleeping Beauty, we have the
She's-
head of thorns, and that's been conjured up by the 13th fairy as
Mm.
punishment for the king not wanting his daughter to bleed. So you get these young men turning up, wanted, they've heard this story about there's the most beautiful maiden in all the world, somewhere in this dark hidden castle beneath all these thorns with great hedge of thorns all around it. And they think, okay, I can get off my horse, get my sword out and hack my way through and make my way to the girl. But you know, bad idea, you know, and they, of course they get the thorns pierce them, and the whole hedge of thorns. After a while, it's all these skeletons, you know, of these princes. But it's a very similar thing that Camilla says in this story. In here, we have probably more agency, but the girls themselves actively work together, consciously and actively work together to make sure these husbands, would-be husbands, get the heads chopped off. It's not just like a sort of magic spell cast by a witch that sort of does it for them. They're active about it. And then, okay, are you fairly happy about what's happened so far? There's one very important last detail to be sorted out, or maybe a couple of 2 or 3 details to be sorted out. You know about the 12 daughters of the king. Who are the princes? I'll just simply say, I suppose, that I mean, in the radical anthropology group, we've had quite a few discussions. We have a book club. We discuss these things. In the West, under patriarchy, we have one concept, and we call it sex. The magical tales divide sex up into different categories, and you can have lots of intimacy and erotic pleasure, which is heterosexual sex. You can have pleasure, dancing together, which is dancing within the framework of one blood. People related by blood can have a good time, if you like. And in fact, Levi-Strauss argues that the stories that he deals with, both the first bird nest myth and all the others, they have this, I mean, the language is very difficult because we just don't have the right terminology. But he uses the term incest, by which he means excessive intimacy between kin. He's not talking about sexual abuse, fathers having sex with their daughters or older brothers and sons. He's talking about a kind of intimacy between people of the same blood. And he says that the stories have an ambivalent attitude towards it. They're never condemning that form of intimacy. In fact, quite the opposite. It's actually and I have to use the word incest with scare quotes around it because it's such a misleading term. But it's the hero who engages in that kind of sex. And let's be clear, it's the kind of sex that won't get anyone pregnant. It's not, it's to do with the blood, it's to do with menstruation. It is pleasurable and very often explicitly erotic, but it's not, if you like, Darwinian sex. It doesn't lead to pregnancy. It's a different kind of intimacy. But Levi-Strauss points out, or makes the point, that the hero who emerges from the story with rain-making power, who's a shaman, who does all sorts of magic, who can bring down thunderstorms and so many things, he is the one who's engaged in that kind of intimacy. Whereas marital sex, okay, you may get babies from it, but it's not magic. It doesn't give you that magic. And the myths are, it's like when they get married, it's like the story fizzles out and they all live happily ever after. Whereas the magical heart of the story relates to a completely different kind of, much more collective intimacy. Having said which, I'll just ask this question again. Who are those 12 princes in the underworld? I mean, we can't say exactly who they are, but it's sort of guesswork, but sort of logically, when you think about it, who do you think they might be? And is there some ideas we might sort of explore and test a bit?
Like related and stuff.
I think so. I mean, the king's got 12.
Inner, like it could be like animal.
Well, I think you're saying that they're brothers.
Yeah, it could be brothers.
It could be brothers. I think that's right, because the king has 12 daughters, and we're not told about those other ones down. So it's like what the girls are enjoying is intimacy, which is like the opposite of marriage. And in anthropological kinship theory, we say relationships are either by blood or by marriage. You have your mother or your mother-in-law. You have your brother-in-law. So kinship and affinity. Kinship is relationships by blood. Affinity is relationships with people who aren't related to you. These look. All the indications are that this is not marriage, and it's the opposite kind of pleasure, dancing pleasure. So they're there, if you like, they're brothers. And of course, the story has to be a bit careful about that one. Because under patriarchy, there are huge taboos around those topics, and increasingly, of course, patriarchy celebrates one kind of sex, and that's the kind that gets people pregnant.
We don't actually have a queen, a mother in the story. Are we proposing that a woman that doesn't exist has like 12 daughters and 12 sons, or how are we explaining this?
Yes,
What is this form of kinship that we're arguing?
It is strange that there's a king, but no queen.
No mention
I
of
don't
queen.
quite know. I don't know any ideas.
He knows everything.
Sorry?
The witch, the old, I'll call it.
Yes.
The old lady.
I suppose the old lady is.
But
I mean, she's not the queen. The old lady.
No,
is the
but
old
doesn't
lady.
really seem to be.
Yes. Okay. I mean, it's like, who needs a queen when you've got a witch? Sorry?
What if it's the old lady's son?
It's her sons.
But in
Yeah.
terms of anthropology, what are we talking about here in terms of kinship? Maybe we need to explain a little bit more. Are these really brothers and sisters, or
Right, okay.
what would be the form of
Yeah.
of
Okay, so I
kinship
think
that it's talking
That's right. So, I mean, Kimon is pointing out, of course, that hunter-gatherers have a system of kinship terminology, which is, we call it classificatory. So with almost all hunter-gatherers, but not just hunter-gatherers, nearly all societies that don't have a headman or, kind of structure, sort of hierarchical structure, including horticultural societies, the kinship system is classificatory, which means that the word mother won't refer to an individual, refer to a class of people who are your mothers. And that comes from the sort of logic of it is you have two sisters, and they won't have sort of private property and children. One sister will say to her sister, my sister's son is my son. Your son is my son. So they treat each other's sons as their sons and their daughters as their daughters. And so over the generations, everyone's got a whole bunch of sisters, and every child has got not just like somebody they call mummy or mother. You've got a whole class of people called mother, all of whom in some way will regard themselves as the mother of the child. So when somebody says, "Oh, my mother's not feeling well today," until you find out a little bit more, you don't know which of the many mothers that child is referring to. So we have a classificated kinship system. And I think Camilla's right. I think this story with the 12 daughters and then the 12 princes, it's a collectivist form of kinship. This is not talking about a nuclear family. Although, of course, it's already patriarchal. There is a king there, but it looks as if the king's needing to establish his authority. It's not going too well until he manages to do that. And he establishes authority by introducing this new system called marriage, marrying off his daughters to, in this case, of course, to.
So can we say that we've got a model of kind of clan, unilineal clan, that would be matrilineal clan, in opposition to the king, who's trying to suppress the activities of this, the mysterious activities of this clan politics. Something like that.
Unlike,
what about the very end of the story?
Yes, I mean, the end of the story, we've over so many years, we've sort of puzzled over this last line. And I'm anyone can make sense of it. Please help out with this. So then the wedding was celebrated on the self-same day, and the kingdom was promised him after the king's death. But the princes were bewitched for as many days as they had danced nights with the 12. So bewitched means you can't marry. So that's usually what being bewitched is. When the spell breaks, you get married and you live happily ever after. When you're bewitched, sometimes you're turned into some animal, and that's how you're bewitched. But somehow the bewitching side of it, the casting of a spell, one of the features is that you can't be married while you're bewitched. And the way I look at that is that if you're bewitched, you're somehow married to the moon. You're married to your blood. It's a different kind of bonding, and of course, marriage is then the wrong word. So these princes do not get married, and they're bewitched for as many days as they dance nights with the 12. Well, how many nights is that? I suppose it's 3, isn't it? They dance 3 nights, so they must be bewitched for 3 days. So it's as if they,
Yeah, but this thing has been going on for a long time. So they've been dancing many, many moons.
okay, so
So,
it looks as if the princes do not get married. Definitely, they stay bewitched, and I mean, that's kind of.
but they aren't getting married to this sisters.
No, they're not getting married to the sisters, and they're not getting, as far as I can see. I mean, I don't know what
But
to make.
doesn't the ending,
It's a
I mean, no, it's very cryptic,
It's very cryptic.
but doesn't it imply that that spell will be lifted? So isn't there some kind of lunacy going on in there? There's an oscillation going on in terms of time.
If they're only bewitched for as many days as they dance nights with the 12, that would be in batches of 3, wouldn't it? So they've had 3 nights dancing with I think their sisters, and now because they're bewitched, they're going to be spending 3 days bewitched.
Well,
Maybe 3 days.
does it mean just 3 days, or does it mean all the times that they've been dancing
Well,
with sisters? We don't know.
Clearly, the truth is, there's only so far we can go with.
Yeah. But isn't the implication that there is a sort of oscillation or balance in time?
Somehow,
However that works out.
that last line speaks of balance, doesn't it? The princes
It
were
speaks of a
bewitched for as
cycle,
many
of a
days as they
change.
dance nights with the 12. It's got a sort of ring to it. It speaks of symmetry and precision, but quite what it means, we will never
So-
know. Yes,
There is something that, so the eldest is married, and that means that now they have to do something in the daytime, they're in the daytime. Right?
yes,
And the marriage is like the union with the patriarchal something, and out of this other playful, and
Yeah.
now with the king and his
Yeah.
other doing things. And so
Yeah.
that they're over the night time. and
Yep.
now they're the witch
They're
on
out in the
daytime.
daytime.
yes. Okay, that's very nice.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's
Agree
lovely.
with that.
That's very nice. I mean, what the king does is not
the
bewitching.
incarnate.
He doesn't, like a forced wedding. I think the bewitching is coming from the other side, from the old lady still. It's a kind of, it's a magical thing, carrying on some part of what the girls were doing each dark moon when they were under their own spell.
Do we? Oh, good.
No, it's just, like, when I listen to the fairy tale this time around, the whole beginning of the description, how the girls were 12 of them, that's next to each other, locked in a chamber. It sounded very much like a clock that was ticking very nicely. And now the other is gone, it sounds all very bewitching. Like this
Yes.
magic
There's
suddenly is
there's-
completely deregulated by this, it's taken out. Element that one, something to do with.
So, yeah, but there's also the fact of coming back to the moon and John's suggestion about the disappearance. You got 12 princes, 12 princesses, plus the odd one
Yes,
in the middle who's
So
like
plus-
wounded,
yeah.
who's gender ambivalent, trickster. So
just as
it's-
with the Sleeping Beauty.
Sleeping
you have
Beauty,
the
yeah.
12 and the 13.
yeah,
Here you have the 12 and the 13. In this case, the 13,
Yeah.
in each case, is the betrayer, the traitor,
mhm,
the intruder. Isn't it? I mean, yeah.
yeah, or the sort of weak point, or the
The
point
weak point,
where,
yeah.
or the point where the shift, the time switches, it changes.
The
Um,
one that gets married is the one that, in a sense, can be seen symbolically, not because she does it willingly, but is the one that has broken the picket line. So in a sense, you know, when we talk about the women coalition, is the one that kind of breaks that coalition, is forced to break that coalition. And in a sense, it speaks to that point of being won over to the patriarchal system, which then curses the entirety of the female.
I mean, she was the one who was most careless about keeping the secrets.
Yeah.
And so she was almost responsible for allowing the disaster of getting married. So maybe for her, she's sort of, as you say, more accepting of that fate of getting married. Yes.
Isabel, we need to
Isabel.
tell the questions to Zoom because
Sorry.
they aren't, anyway, go on, yeah.
If there might be a but marriage also, and the thing about like intimacy, kinship intimacy is not producing a baby. Potentially. So, but marriage is going to produce a baby, which is also like a huge transition from being bleeding but without child.
Yeah.
To, and then you don't bleed. When you have
Yeah.
a baby bleeding.
So you're
But
not,
there's also that link to not bleeding and being in the daytime, which in the day, married to the man, i.e. having baby sex.
so when you're not bleeding, you're not bewitched. Is that right?
Well, you're not
When you're
doing
not,
Well, you're having sex with a husband and reproducing.
just a
there's no myth or ritual which says that the way to get ritual power and magical power is to have sex with your husband. That's always the way to lose it.
Well, that's what they've done. They've
Yeah.
lost the 12.
But it's the movement between this world and the other world, really, because pregnant women are still part of the sex strike coalition. They'd still be part of the magic.
In real
It's
life,
about whether they're in a the situation of marriage with a husband or whether they're with their kin coalition. So I'm not sure we can say. Just
what we
because.
haven't quite done, is it? We haven't quite fixed where the girls are or where they go to when they get into bed together and get into the underworld. But I think when Camilla did the social media advertising of tonight's talk, we had the beautiful pictures which so often go with this story. All the artists that depict where the sisters go, they depict a kind of an underground world with beautiful trees, but up in the sky there's the stars and there's a crescent moon.
It's always a crescent.
And to be knowing, say, particularly like North American myths and rituals, we have a thing called the sweat lodge. So the girl, I'm just thinking of the Yurok, for example. What happens is all the women traditionally, this is what they say at any rate, they would all go up to a sacred moon-type pond when they're having their periods, and the men would go into a sweat lodge because they did sort of similar things like cutting their legs to make themselves bleed, just so that they could be doing the same thing, kind of bleeding that the women were doing. But these special houses, called sweat lodges, right across North America, really, they were kind of almost like observatories. They were places from which you could watch the stars and watch the movements of the moon, and there would be places to go into for seclusion. Europe would argue that when women go into seclusion, they go into this lodge. All I'm saying is that the illustrations of this fairy tale, they make it beautifully clear that these girls are going into seclusion, going to this magical world of the darkness with the trees made of silver and gold and diamonds. I mean, these are clearly the night sky. So I'm just saying, to me, it's just so clear that something like going into seclusion with the flowing of the blood is the place to which these sisters are going. And it's just that seems to apply to all these fairy tales. There's always a movement from this world into the other world. It's triggered by a flow of blood in some form or another. And what's different is the degree of enchantment, of magic and joy depicted as you go into that other world. I mean, it can be, of course, going to the other world, the land of the dead, can be pictured very negatively, and marriage can be pictured as a liberation from a wicked witch's evil spell. It's just that in this story, it's all turned upside down, isn't it? The joy and the magic and the power goes with getting to bed together, going to the other world, and the wedding is enforced by the king as a punishment on his eldest daughter, and everything's turned around, just enabling us to see the range of possibilities of all these stories. Instead of just thinking that wicked witches cast evil spells, we can see a whole other side of things, a real collectivism and joy in being together as women before marriage.
So is this story patriarchal or not? What does anyone think?
Well, the question is this story patriarchal? I suppose all the stories are patriarchal, but they're always wonderfully ambivalent, wonderfully contradictory, wonderfully mixed. There's so much of matriarchy and patriarchy in all the stories that are alive with conflict and ambivalence and contradiction. So it's actually one of the most matriarchal of all Grimm's fairy tales, which ends up with a victory for patriarchy, because the king does have his way in the end.
But it's not permanent. This last line sounds as though there's going to be a release for the princes at some point.
Yes, that's a good one, Camilla. Yes, okay, that's
Is
nice.
it a permanent victory for
Okay,
patriarchy?
I'm persuaded by that. That's a more convincing argument than before. The king wins.
We've got another.
The king wins, but the princes were bewitched for as many days as they had danced nights with the 12. I suppose it's just a question of what do we mean by bewitched?
Yeah.
Is bewitched to be sort of frozen, punished, unable to be married, or is to be bewitched a kind of joy and magic?
Turned into
It's
stone.
just as themselves enjoyed when they were bewitched.
There was excuse me, there was someone here, and then we'll cut because it's better. Would you? Yeah.
I'm trying to suss out why marriage ends the fun or ends the magic, and is it linked to this sort of continuous fight between order and disorder that we have without so many creation myths, or is it something else?
So the question's about, does this marriage stopping the magic, is there a link between order and disorder, order and chaos?
Really
It's
interesting.
very interesting.
So in RAG, we have a view as to how society was before patriarchy. And we say it wasn't really matriarchy. It was never been, we don't think it was ever a period among the hunter-gatherers where women seized power, held power, kept the power, and used their power against men. Rather, what we think of is more like what Mona Finnegan describes as communism in motion, which means that women did take the power and then surrendered it, and then took the power and then surrendered it. And a very good model for something close to that, not exactly, it is what Jerome Lewis describes going on with the Bengali people in the Congo, forest people, where the women have a ritual called Ngoku, and it's this a raucous, wonderful, joyful seizure of the whole camp by these girls, taunting the men, making fun of them, making quite rude comments about the men's bits kind of thing, and having a great time, kind of sex education among other things going on in that ritual. But then the women get a bit almost bored with, being on top. And so, okay, we've made our point. Let's get back to, there's a period of normality. And then the men strut their stuff, and they have this thing called a jenge, which is men strutting around being real men. And that could get a bit out of hand if that went on too long. So the women sort of, make it, yeah, you make your point, yeah, you make your point, and the jenge stops. So you get women's rule, men's rule, women's rule. So to answer your question, the problem with marriage is that you're stuck. A man marries a woman. She said yes to sex. Okay, she can't be raped because she said yes all those years ago. Whereas with what we think of as communism in motion, women say yes and no, and yes and no. Women in control of their bodies, collectively controlled. The no signal is as valid and as powerful as the yes signal. And that's a very different model from patriarchal marriage, which just says, right, you said yes all those years ago, you're my wife, it's contractual, I have conjugal rights in you because you said yes all those years ago. So that is how we think. I mean, there's a whole lot of interesting stuff going on in anthropology today as a result of a book called The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengo. And the question asked by this amazing book is, how did we get stuck? This is how we got stuck. This story is telling us.
So the story is talking about getting stuck.
Getting stuck.
But still the last line suggests it's still resisting.
Last line, yes, as well.
I can't remember which time it is, but I've been is it in Sahara, where marriage is just like by spoken word, and then you just break it by saying we're not married.
It sounds like the Hadza.
The Hadza might do that.
I remember with the Hadza talking to something like the Hadza guy I was with. Camilla did some field work there. We had a whole bunch of us doing field work with the Hadza, but I was there for this short while. But I just remember this friend of mine who actually brought back to Hackney. He said, Chris, you know, I can marry a woman, and then she'll say tomorrow, by the way, I've changed my mind. So it's just like, yeah.
Pretty normal with hunter-gatherers to just decide, no, we're not married anymore. I mean, the marriage is like by the moon, if you like. For the Hadza, it's actually observable that two people are married if they maintain certain taboos on menstruation and their behavior around menstruation. So it's like each moon, you're making a decision. Are you going to be married in front of the eyes of the community?
So according to the abstract model, husband and wife would be divorced around menstruation at dark moon. Around full moon, you know, we all know full moon, honeymoon, moon and June, all of our fairy tales, you know, boys and girls come out to play. The moon does shine as bright as day. Full moon is a time for romance. The dark moon is a time for blood and sort of witchcraft in all those traditions. So you get married, you get divorced, you get married, you get divorced. But the divorce is not quite the right word, because when you divorce your husband, you re-contact your brother and sister. So and that's when I was starting this evening, I was mentioning the birdness of the stories. What's happening is that you have two relatives, father and son, and they come together and divorce, come together and divorce. And what's really going on behind the scenes actually is that men are dying as husbands but coming alive as brothers. Women are dying as sisters but coming alive as wives, or dying as wives and coming alive as sisters. So all this death and rebirth is partly that your roles are changing. So as a wife, you die around new moon that you're menstruating.
So maybe that's what this last line is about, that those princes die, they're bewitched because they become husbands elsewhere or something like that.
You'll never know
They
quite what
change.
that last line means.
No,
but the
they
point about
change.
death and rebirth is that you die in one role. So
You
all
come
husbands
back
around, okay, in a sort of rather abstract model, around dark moon, blood should be flowing, and all husbands die to be replaced by brothers, because husbands turn into brothers. All wives die because in the role of wives they cease to exist, and they come alive, of course, as sisters. So brothers and sisters come together. But at full moon, the witchcraft spell breaks, and then brothers who've been attached to their sisters in some ritual way, kind of, you know, are no longer brothers. They become husbands, and the women they're related to now are other women who are now their wives. So you get a death and rebirth in terms of roles on an essentially once a month basis. And that's the kind of magic from which, if we're right, all these stories emerge.
Irene?
I just want to say, I mean, is it plausible? Because this is a myth which is primarily about initiation as well, right?
Yeah,
We framed it earlier.
Yes, that's
So,
good. Yeah.
Could it just be that within that reverse framework, which is essentially a reverse framework from a primarily matriarchal idea, essentially the whole system, the whole story is kind of like a moral story, about the moral tale, and that last line alludes to the fact that either in a patriarchal system, you get married and you get cursed, as in like menstruation turns into a curse.
Yes.
As in, so that's how I interpret it as well. As in that kind of reverse perspective, where everything that is to do with the female is either subjugation or curse, in terms of like menstruation now be seen as something that bewitches women, or something that is.
Right, I'm not sure how to tell the Zoom
Well,
this.
once marriage is established
marriage
as a
is
sort of official
established,
system, and it's your blessing, you're blessed by getting married. What one consequence of that marital blessing, if you like, is that menstruation is correspondingly turned into a curse, or even, of course, the curse. So the blessing and the curse sort of change places according to which perspective you're adopting. But patriarchy, when it turns marriage into the ultimate reward, you marry your prince, your princess, that's, you know, and they all live happily ever after. The corollary of that is that menstruation is turned into the opposite of a blessing, namely the curse.
It's an initiation story, so something that you.
Yes, that's the point. That's the point. Yeah, yes, I left that out really. I didn't make that strong, powerful enough. This is clearly, again, another way of putting it, is this whole experience described as these girls go into the underworld and dance and dance and dance. It's their collective initiation into adult life. And of course, under patriarchy, that becomes a preparation for marriage. You're not allowed to get married until you've been initiated. And so this movement from the underworld relationships to the above world marital relationships would be quite accurately reflected in what really happened to women, where you get initiated with a whole bunch of other girls, and then that's the end of all the fun, and you're married off. Yeah, very nice. That was an important part of the story, which I didn't stress enough.
Thank
earlier.
you.
Yeah.
In terms of stories that are comparable to this story, what is the most obviously comparable, and how similar and how different is it? Which story most compares with this? We shoes that were danced to pieces, girls going to dance for 3 nights, silver, gold, and diamonds. Cinderella. So this is like a counterpart to Cinderella, but how similar or how different is it? And what is the
So, I mean,
link with Cinderella
do
here?
we want to go quickly into Cinderella? So,
Well, what does anybody
right.
think on that one? Is it, I mean, what differences and similarities?
Well, they've both got shoes in. This one's got shoes in, and Cinderella's got shoes in. What happens to the shoes in the Grimm's version of Cinderella? There are different versions, but they kind of. Do you remember what happens to the shoes?
This makes the symbolism of the shoes very, very clear if we look at it in Cinderella, because what happens? She,
Right. So that's right, because okay. So in
there are
Cinderella,
sisters in Cinderella.
so we don't have 12 sisters in Cinderella, but we have 2. And then we have their sort of stepsister, who's Cinderella. Cinderella is cooked. She's Cinderella. She's the mistress of the hearth. She lives among the cinders. The other sisters are not cooked. The opposite of cooked
Ugly
is
sisters.
raw. They're so raw that they bleed.
They're always bleeding.
And the point is that the word ugly just means not marriageable. So the so-called ugly sisters are with each other and their mother. Cinderella is supremely marriageable because she's got no mother or sisters. She's got no kids. She's all on her own. And of course, what happens is that their mother, the ugly sister, so-called ugly sister's mother, wants them to be eligible for marriage, and they've only got these particular shoes. Perrault's version of glass slippers, others always made of glass. But anyway, the point is that the stepmother, Cinderella's stepmother, their mother, the ugly sister's mother, she says, right, you can easily put your foot into this shoe, just chop your toe off, or chop your heel off. And it's only when one of those sisters is on horseback crossing the grave of Cinderella's mother, on which is a little tree, on which is a little bird. The little bird sings, turn and peep, turn and peep, turn and peep. The false bride rides with you. And
There's blood in the shoe.
There's
blood in the shoe.
There's blood in the shoe. But anyway, it's only when the prince sees the blood in the shoe that he recognizes that this is not Cinderella.
It's not Cinderella. The only way you can tell the difference between Cinderella and the other sisters is whether they're bleeding.
They're ugly is ridiculous. I mean, he's obviously entranced with them. It's just that they're menstruating. But the fact that they've got blood in the shoe, clearly, so it's more explicit in Cinderella that the shoe with a hole in it is menstruation than it is in this story we've been looking at. But I mean, really, it's fairly clear either way. Yes.
I wondered if there was some link between the whole thing, the soul and earth, and sitting on the earth and bleeding in parts. If there is a true
Except that.
Can we just repeat for
Yes,
the question-
is there a connection between the hole in the shoe? If there's a hole in your shoe, you're clearly walking on the earth because your shoe's got a hole in it.
And if it's blood in the shoe, then that implies you're just bleeding on the earth in a hut or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, of
Mhm.
course,
Yeah.
rule, there's the classic rule that Sir James Fraser worked out in the Golden Bough is that the
Should
girl,
never sort of-
when she's in seclusion, her head must, the sun must not shine on her head and her feet must not touch the ground. She has to be betwixt heaven and earth. So, I mean, yes, but it wouldn't be ordinary earth. It would be the inside of a special sacred hut probably raised above the ground as well. So,
Which is the castle, which is the beautiful castle, yeah.
which is,
I mean,
yes,
they've
yeah.
obviously got a giant menstrual hut, which is more like a temple than a menstrual
Yes,
hut,
that's an interesting point.
with their clan brothers
Yes.
dancing away,
Yes.
so.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, I mean, you probably know that in societies which have kind of recently become, or societies where men monopolize ritual power, in those societies, men kind of menstruate, they nosebleed or various ways of men imitating menstruation, and they do that in a great men's house. And sometimes this men's house is an enormous building, but the building, in all the myths, they say this was originally a women's house. And men one day got fed up with women ruling, and the men rebelled and expelled the women and took over the house for themselves. So Camilla's point here is that in this story, across the river, that castle would be kind of men's house, except it would be not a men's house. It would be a women's house, as the women are still with their
Clan house.
and not getting married off. So that's another interesting point, which I suppose I hadn't noticed. You picture that castle, and it's a women's house. Yeah, that's good. Right.
Have we
How
got,
much
oh yeah, have we got any more thoughts here or thoughts on Zoom? John, you were saying about John was just talking about this idea of lunar appropriation in this Lionel Sims model. The initiates of Avebury, for instance, accompany the moon through the underworld in a ritual that lasts at least 3 periods, day, night, day. So is this a kind of lunar appropriation by the men pretending or masquerading as women or taking over the powers of women?
Well, it is interesting that
and
the
they
only way that the women's secret can be betrayed and the world turned against them and marriage installed is by a man being a kind of menstruating man, wounded, an old soldier with a wound.
And being very connected with this secret or knowledge, secret knowledge.
Yes, if you've been wounded, you've nearly died.
Yeah.
Um,
So who's this witch then?
And he gets this witch. Who is the witch? Yeah. Yeah, we hardly have anything.
we don't know who she is.
You don't know. You don't know.
It makes it certainly a patriarchal story.
Yeah, she seems to have given the game away very much. Yeah.
Perhaps I should stress something which is important in Levi-Strauss. So, I mean, Levi-Strauss says you just cannot make sense of a myth. You have to take one variant, another variant, another variant, another variant. So, with one myth you can get so far, but in order to really understand what the myth's saying, you have to look at as many different versions of the myth as you can. I mean, maybe there are quite a few other versions of the shoes that were danced to pieces. I mean, like direct. I mean, there's certainly other versions in Grimm's of the 12 dancing princesses. It may have a slightly different name. And of course, there are plenty of stories which never got into Grimm's, which have been recorded, Russian ones, Eastern European ones. But I'm just saying, Levi-Strauss was saying, don't really think that you can look at a myth and read it and work out what it means. It's most unlikely that you'll be able to do that. But what you can do is get enough different versions to be able to increasingly find out sort of underlying continuities within these versions, and not just continuities, other logical operations, contrasts as well. They're also very helpful. So in the end of the day, the more versions you have, the better. And this evening we've been looking at one story, obviously with a little bit of reference to the Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, because that's always helpful. But it's just that we really need to kind of welcome as many magical tales as possible, because they're all telling us something very, very important about what it means to be human and how life once was, and all sorts of things which have been long forgotten. Somebody else on Zoom.
It's Eleanor, or is it Ian? Eleanor Mariki or Ian? Who is it? Hello? Need to unmute.
Yeah, there's a French version of the shoes that would dance to pieces.
Uh-huh.
There's a French version of the shoes that
Choose
dance
the
to
dance
pieces.
pieces.
Okay,
At the very end,
right.
I think in that version he does marry the youngest daughter, which and the magic he acquired originally took the form of 2 bitter laurel trees.
Oh, right.
He had to.
Another version where the old man, this wounded soldier, marries the youngest daughter,
youngest.
and where he has 2 laurel trees. Are those instead of the twigs, Ian?
No, that's what gives him the magic. The first one
Original magic.
gives him the power to be invisible, and second one I can't remember offhand. But
So
the point is well, there are 2 points. One is that as he's not a wounded soldier, he's a shepherd. But and so the point to emphasize there is this other theme is turning traditional medieval hierarchical aristocratic power upside down, the wounded soldier or the shepherd.
I see, yeah.
Right.
Is that that his bride, the first thing she does once they get married is make sure that she cuts down the 2 laurel trees to make sure that he doesn't have that kind of magic power anymore.
Do you think the laurel trees are related to something like what are they related to? Like the Delphic?
Well, I could
what do
only
you think?
guess so, yes. I mean, I think that was one of the things that were part of women's rituals that were then banned.
Say
Right,
that,
Ian on the Zoom is saying there's a French version of the story. I haven't read the version, but Ian's saying that although it's not a wounded soldier who is the sort of what's the word? What's the word? The sort of anti-hero, I suppose you could call him. It's a shepherd, but both a wounded soldier and a shepherd are like the lowest of the low in society. They're not part of the hierarchy. And for him to become king is turning the world upside down in some sense. And he marries the youngest daughter, but he's given his power not by an old lady giving him an invisible cloak, but by 2 laurel trees. And when he marries the younger sister, first thing she does is get rid of those laurel trees so that he doesn't have any more magic.
So she can keep him under control.
Keep him under control.
Yes, which all the trees that both then represent the earth and the represent the earth.
Right. Now I'm getting a little bit
right. Chris, you've had enough. I'll sit down.
I'm not saying it's getting close to my bedtime. Still away.
Chris was.
I've actually been
not very well. Been having a bit of a. Are you okay now?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Too. So we probably, unless there's some burning more questions or comments, we're probably going to draw this to an end and say, thanks very much for coming for this term, and I hope you'll be able to come back next term. We will have some more fairy tales, as well as a lot of hunter-gatherer talks and talks on origins of language and a whole variety. Shakti Lamba as well will be talking about her work, her Indian work in India. So there's going to be quite a variety. And
next term has traditionally been an intensive study of mythology.
And we are going to be doing the bird nester, we're going to be doing rainbow snake, we're going to be doing, with Helena from Slovakia, we're going to be doing a specific Slovakian story which could be related to bird nester. So there will be some more magical myths and fairy tales, definitely. The program for that the first talk is going to be January the 9th. So we're looking 4 weeks from now. I'm going to do that on how egalitarianism made us human and why Graeber and Wengrow are wrong. So you can find out about that. It's a bit provocative. And that's January the 9th. And Chris is going to do a couple. Jerome, who had to go home tonight, he's going to do a talk on women's biggest husband is the moon. The communism emotion of the Ngoku of the Bayaka women with the Ajangi, the Bayaka man. And we also have UCL's Gul Salali, who's just done some wonderful work on multiple caregiving for Bayaka children. So Bayaka infants have at least 3 carers who, as soon as they cry, will come and support those infants. So there's several excellent talks there. And I'll put up details for those on the Eventbrite in the next few days. So you'll soon find out if you want to find out more. Otherwise, it's just
Well,
stay
nobody
together.
get in the pub. I'll make a
Well,
brief. I'll
have a very quick
we-
one. I think
we said
Chris-
not to have a
yeah.
Christmas drink, so let's.
Very quick Christmas drink. We would go to the Tavistock Hotel, which is down at the bottom of Tavistock Square. It's just around the corner. So anyone who wants to join us, otherwise, I hope you have a lovely holiday and lovely solstice. And that this has put you in the mood for some partying and magical nights.
Thanks everyone for the help in the story. So.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. It was fantastic.
Thanks to everybody on Zoom. We're going to
Thank
say
you. Good
goodbye
night.
and hopefully see you next year, as many as
Sure.
possible. Goodbye. Bye, Leoncia. Thank you
Definitely.
very
Bye,
much.
everyone.
Bye.